Thank you, Len. Hi, everyone. I'm Stella Jordan, the Public Engagement Program Manager at the Boston MPO. I'm just going to go through a few housekeeping items before we get started. As Len said, welcome to our February meeting of the Regional Transportation Advisory Council. You are invited to participate in our transportation planning process, regardless of your race, color, national origin, including limited English proficiency, religion, creed, gender, ancestry, ethnicity, disability, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, veteran status, or background. You can read the full notice of your rights and protections at www.bostmpo.org/mpo_discrimination. This meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions of the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 Level AA standards, and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodations in order to participate fully in this meeting, please contact me at sjordan@ctps.org or at 857-702-3675. The guidelines: as you joined us, you should have joined us with muted microphones. Please remain on mute unless you're actively speaking. To participate in the discussion, you can select the raised hand function, which you can find either by clicking the participants button at the bottom of the screen. A window will then pop up with a raised hand button at the bottom, or you can access this via the reactions button in the toolbar. And if you're joining us by phone today, you can also use *9 to raise your hand, and one of us will call on you. At this point, if you've not done so already, please also rename yourself to include your first name, last name, and affiliation if you'd like. And if you should have any technical difficulties during this meeting, please don't hesitate to contact me. Again, you can do so via the chat box or at sjordan@ctps.org. Send me an email there, or you can call me at 857-702-3675. And I'll hand it back over to Len for some introductions.
Thank you, Stella. So whereas we do have a full agenda, it's not so packed this time that we can't handle around the introduction. So I'll call your name. You just tell us a little bit about yourself, and appreciate it. So Anna Christina Fergausa.
Hi, I'm sorry. I'm going to be driving, so I'm going to stay on mute. But Anna Christina Fergausa, Boston Society of Civil Engineers.
All right, thank you, Anna. I'm Daniel Carty.
Yeah, good afternoon, Dan Carty, Sudbury Select Board and Transportation Committee. Really kind of curious to listen in on the IPWP conversation. So I'm just here to listen. Thanks.
Okay. You mean the UPWP, I think. Okay, I was a little confused. So, okay.
UPWP, great. What did I say?
You said I, and I was like,
no,
I was a little confused because I thought, well, maybe that's related to equity in some way,
No.
So no problem. Normally, I don't correct people when it's obvious that they just made a simple error, but I was just thrown off a little bit. So, all right, gotcha. Thank you. Yeah, my favorite topic too. So Michael Miller or Mike Miller. He's unmuted. We're not hearing him talking, so we'll mute him and maybe come back. John Seward.
John Seward, Booth, Mass.
Thank you, John. Andy Reeker.
I'm Andy Reeker at the City of Cambridge, Transit Program Manager.
Thank you, Andy. Franny Osmond.
Hi, Franny Osmond, Acton, Mass, and Vice Chair of RTAC.
Your volume's really low, Franny, just so you know.
Oh, okay. I'm going to put on some earphones. I bet it'll be better.
Yeah, it's a little bit better, So Holly McMullen.
Hi, I'm affiliated with the Conservation Law Foundation. I'm attending this meeting as a member of the public.
Great, thank you, Holly. And John McQueen.
John McQueen, live in Sudbury, and I'm representing Walk Boston.
Thank you, John. John Strauss.
Hi, Len. John Strauss from Burlington. I was on the Burlington Transportation Committee.
Great.
And I was interested in the report, the exploration of destinations, et cetera, and the transportation analysis of equity. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Great. Thanks for joining us. Logan Casey.
Hi there, Logan Casey, Capital Programming Planner with the Boston NPO.
Great. Thank you, Logan. Owen McDonald.
Owen McDonald, Town of Weymouth.
Thank you, Owen. Rain Hoyland.
Rain Hoyland with Town of Needham.
Thank you, Rain. Sam Taylor. All right. We'll move on. Tyler Tarasi.
Hey there, Tyler Tarasi, Metro West Regional Transit Authority, listening in this afternoon.
Thank you, Tyler. Circle back to Mike Miller. Yeah. So that leaves us with Betsy Harvey, who is going to be our guest, and we will let Betsy introduce herself when we go to the first item on the agenda, which is next, or the next item on the agenda. Well, actually, you know what? We do have public comments now, so we'll hold off on Betsy for a little bit and find out if there's anyone that want to make a public comment. You just raise your hand. If you do so electronically, that'll make it possible for me to see you, because when we do the screen share, and I can't see all of the thumbnails. Okay, I'm not seeing a hand raised. But at this point, just in case you are unable to raise your hand, if you want to say something, just say something. Okay, fine. And so now we'll move to the next item on the agenda, which is a discussion of the MPO equity work. This is by Betsy Harvey, the staff. It's going to be a discussion of the MPO equity program, including Title VI, recent equity projects and highlights, and the future program goals. And I just want to preface this by saying, and I haven't said this at a full board meeting lately, but I'm just really impressed by the equity work that the MPO does. As it'll be noted on one of the slides, that we go beyond what's required. And I know from working with people on these issues a lot, that the staff really cares about equity, and they really care about trying to do whatever we can to correct for past inequities. Well, if we don't make a real effort to do that, it'll be hard to really get an equitable system, at least anytime soon. So with that, I now turn it over to Betsy Harvey.
Thank you, Lem. That's very kind of you. I am really excited to be here. I'm Betsy Harvey. I run the Transportation Equity Program for the MPO. And part of the reason that I'm here today is the MPO recently released the Title VI report for public comments. So I hope that that some of you will take a look at it, and if you can provide public comment, we're happy to hear feedback. And today we're looking at not just Title VI, but kind of beyond Title VI. That's why we're talking about Len is talking about going beyond, above and beyond, because the Transportation Equity Program includes Title VI, but it also includes a lot of other things, including data analysis and public engagement, which my colleague Stella Jordan leads on and we collaborate a lot on. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about the Title VI that we do. I'm not going to go into as much detail on Title VI as I did at the MPO presentation. That presentation is on YouTube if you're interested in taking a look at that. I'm going to talk also about how we go above and beyond Title VI through our Transportation Equity Program, where we are today, kind of close of year 2022, and where we're going in 23 and beyond. So Title VI, just as an overview, in case you're not familiar or need a refresher, is a federal law that prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin. And national origin is defined as folks with limited English proficiency. Now, FTA and Federal Transit Administration and Federal Highway Administration as federal agencies are all required to comply with Title VI, and they pass through requirements around Title VI through to their recipients of kind of their dollars, which includes the MPO. So we receive funding from them, and so we have to comply with their federal Title VI requirements. It's a slightly confusing in the sense that FTA and FHWA both have their own Title VI requirements. Under FTA, their Title VI program covers only Title VI, race and color, and limited English proficiency, whereas FHWA's Title VI program includes Title VI, but also some other regulations that you might be familiar with, including environmental justice and other non-discrimination regulations, including covering the ADA, accessibility for folks with disabilities, covers prohibition of discrimination on the basis of age and sex as well. There's also sometimes some confusion about the difference between Title VI and environmental justice. They are not the same things. They cover, first of all, several different population groups. Both of them address and cover minority populations, but Title VI also includes limited English proficiency, and EJ covers the low-income population as well. And from a regulatory perspective, there's also a major difference in that Title VI is a law, and therefore there are kind of repercussions if one is not in compliance with that law. Whereas environmental justice is really a planning process that comes from an executive order and does not have the teeth that a law has, and therefore is it's really guidance about how we engage in our planning processes and making sure that we are addressing we are engaging low-income and minority populations in planning and project development, and making sure that we're doing analyses about how our projects and plans impact those population groups. And ADA is not covered under environmental justice or Title VI. ADA is still a law and something that we do comply with. As I'll note in a moment, it is part of the equity program. So there are a lot of different layers here, and I hopefully I haven't already confused you all. But in general, the equity program kind of covers broadly kind of demographic regulations around how we treat people in our planning processes. And that's, I think, kind of the major takeaway from this. So back to the Title VI report, we, as I mentioned, have finished the 2022 Title VI report. It's called a triennial, and it covers both federal highway and federal transit Title VI programs. You'll note that annual reports, there are those, they exist, but they are for FHWA purposes only. Again, another just kind of idiosyncrasy of Title VI reporting. But the one that is out right now covers FHWA and FTA programs. And as a recipient to MassDOT of our federal funding, we submit all of our reporting to MassDOT, and MassDOT kind of gathers them for the state's MPOs and submits those to our federal partners, in case you're kind of curious how that process works. So the main purpose of Title VI reporting is to demonstrate compliance with Title VI and other kind of regulations and guidance that are under the Federal Highway and Federal Transit Administration regulations. But there's a kind of a bigger picture, which is really what I want to get at as we move through the presentation, is that we want to be sharing the analysis results with the MPO board and with the public. And that's something that we did at the last MPO, or a couple of weeks ago, one of the MPO meetings. It focused on some of the results of the Title VI report analyses. So if you're interested in those, I encourage you to check those out. The report is on the meeting calendar for today's our advisory council meeting. So you can certainly check those analyses out. And we look at things like, how do project impacts differ between demographic groups? How is funding distributed between different demographic groups? Where does it go kind of geographically, but also kind of relative to where people live? And are the benefits and burdens of transportation projects fairly distributed among different population groups? So this is a little bit more detail into those sorts of questions as we try to answer them through our Title VI analyses. We have in one column the benefits and burdens analyses, looking at project impacts. You might be familiar with our disparate impact, disproportionate burden analysis. That's an example of that sort of analysis. We also do an analysis in the TIP, the Transportation Improvement Program, looking at emissions such as carbon monoxide and other pollutants. See how, where, and who is getting most affected by the pollutants that might be emitted due to our projects that we're funding. We also look at project funding. So how is funding distributed by demographic group compared to kind of the regional average, to see if we're kind of funding, providing funding in areas relative to the number, the percentage of people in the region in each demographic group. For transit, we have actual ridership data, so we are able to look at who's riding the transportation, different transportation lines, transit lines, and where is the funding going? Are they going to say bus routes where there are, maybe more EJ riders of color, lower income folks, or is it going to other projects? And finally, we also look at project proximity. We look at who lives near a project as kind of a proxy for impact. It is very difficult actually to analyze project impacts. And so this proximity analysis allows us to get kind of at least an idea of who might be impacted by projects and who might be benefiting from the things that the improvements that we are making to the transportation system. Those are sorts of analyses you'll see in both our TIP, our long range plan, as well as in the Title VI report. I want to just mention to kind of what equity, when we talk about equity, what population groups we're talking about. We're not talking about geographic equity. That's not something that's federally regulated or mandated of any kind. Not unimportant, but that's not kind of what we're talking about when we talk about equity, the equity program. We're talking about 6 different demographic groups, some of which you'll recognize as being Title VI populations, others that are covered by other non-discrimination laws and regulations. They include the minority population, the low-income population, people with limited English proficiency, people with disabilities, older adults, so ages 75 and older, and children, people under the age of 18. So when we say we're doing analyses on, say, our funding and where the funding is going, we're looking at these 6 different demographic groups and seeing where the funding is going relative to each of the demographic groups. So that's kind of a brief primer on Title VI. So we're going to move on to kind of the meat of the presentation, looking at the transportation equity program more broadly, in that we try to go above and beyond what we're supposed to be doing just for Title VI into promoting equity and addressing and redressing inequities that exist in our transportation system and improve outcomes for everybody. So equity at the MPO is, we kind of look at it as a equity in all policies approach. You might have heard health in all policies. It's the same sort of idea that the CDC takes, that around health, that we want to be looking at equity throughout all of the work that we do. It has to be integral to every policy process and decision that we make as a board and at the staff level. It has to be inclusive through public engagement and collaboration, and strategic through developing processes for data collection, analyses, and planning. So Title VI regulations, one of the reasons why we need to be going above and beyond Title VI is that it only requires MPOs to prevent future discrimination. There's no requirement to address transportation inequities or disparities that exist on the ground today or anything from the past. And therefore, what can happen is that existing transportation inequities, for example, maybe when one population group is exposed to more pollution than another, those can just be made worse because we're not addressing what is happening today. Because we know they exist in all sorts of areas of our transportation and travel lives, from how much we pay for transportation to the air quality, the air we breathe, how much congestion we sit through on a daily basis, travel times to and from work and other destinations, impacts on our health, such as asthma and heart disease and obesity and other public health challenges, and access to different destinations such as jobs. And to make equitable decisions, that means we have to measure them. We need to know where we are today if we're going to have a better and brighter future. So this is our little roadmap that we've kind of working on as we work toward measuring inequities and figuring out where we need to go. We need to start by identifying transportation needs. We need to be developing transportation metrics to measure those needs. We need to analyze those metrics, and we need to evaluate outcomes against MPO goals. So it's a really timely presentation because the MPO just kind of it decided to move forward with a new set of transportation goals and objectives in our long range plan. And so that's, we'll come back to that and see how that kind of fits into this puzzle of how we measure and evaluate our progress. So where we are today. As I mentioned, we just have now, well, the MPO, I'll say the LRTP hasn't been endorsed yet, but in terms of moving forward with the plan, we have a new set of transportation goals and objectives, one of which is a transportation equity goal. And it differs a bit from what we've had in the past and what we had for the past 4 years under Destination 2040. So the new goal is to facilitate an inclusive and transparent transportation planning process and make investments that eliminate transportation related disparities or invite people in disadvantaged communities. Now that differs in 2 major ways from what we had in the past. In the past, we focused on kind of making sure that in the future, we're not providing disparate benefits or disparate burdens to different population groups. And now we're focusing on what is on the ground today on eliminating and addressing inequities that exist today, not just in the future. The other big change we have is including a piece on engagement, facilitating an inclusive and transparent transportation planning process. Say that 5 times fast. So that's really critical. That's something we've had in our goals before, and I think that demonstrates the importance that we put, certainly as staff and as a board, on engaging with disadvantaged communities and making sure that we're elevating those voices in the work that we do. Another major change that we made to the transportation objectives is we have all these different goal areas: the safety, clean air and healthy communities, mobility and reliability, access and connectivity, and resiliency. And within those now, under each goal area, we have an objective, at least one objective related specifically to equity, so that we can more call out the importance of equity in those goals. And it gives us something to kind of to look at and to try to start measuring as we go forward. So under safety, we want to eliminate disparities in safety outcomes. In clean air and healthy communities, we want to address air pollution and environmental burdens. We have 2 under mobility and reliability, addressing disparities in transit reliability and frequency, and keeping transportation assets like roads and bridges in a state of good repair. In access and connectivity, we want to remove barriers and make it easy for people of all abilities to use our transportation system. And under resiliency, we need to reduce disproportionate climate and environmental burdens. So that kind of sets the framework for kind of where we're kind of starting from as in 2023. I also want to point to a couple of studies that we've been undertaking, that we recently undertook to help us identify some of the transportation needs and begin to think about how we might better measure and address some of these needs. And I'll go through them quickly just because they've been presented already to the MPO. And again, they're available on YouTube if you want to watch the presentations. And you'll note on the bottom of the screen, on the bottom left-hand side, there's 4 little steps that we have from that graphic a couple of slides ago. And it'll change kind of colors with the yellow arrow to indicate kind of where we're at in the discussion in terms of what of the 4 steps we're talking about. So in case you're kind of curious what that is and want to kind of put the presentation, put the slide in context. So some of my colleagues recently finished a study looking at the equity and access to the Blue Hills. And and looked at transit access from nearby Boston neighborhoods to the Blue Hills Reservation that's just south of Boston, because the neighborhoods such as Mattapan and Dorchester have a high share of people of color and people with lower incomes and people without access to a vehicle. And they live only a few miles from this beautiful open space area, but it's difficult to get to without a car. And so it was proposed to the MPO by a coalition of advocates and community groups, and our staff developed several new transit service options to improve access. So really important to us, one of the most important destinations that people actually have is access to parks, and how can we kind of improve that, because it improves a whole host of other outcomes that are important to people's lives. Another study we undertook is the identifying transportation inequities in the Boston region. And that was interesting in contrast to the Blue Hills study, because Blue Hills looked really at one location, access to one park. This one study looked at the bigger region as a whole and looked at access overall to several different destinations across our region, including parks. One of the goals of the study was to develop a set of initial baseline equity metrics that we could build off of in future years. And I'll talk more about what we're doing in that area in a few minutes. We also wanted to create and document a methodology that we could replicate, and that in fact anyone could replicate. It is actually all online, and you can dive through it and replicate it yourself if you wanted to. So we could really make sure that we have the information we need to continue to do this work, but also to be transparent and allow other folks to also use this information to assist their own work. One of the products that we produced from this study is this online application. I won't go through it right now. Estelle, if you have a moment, if you could maybe drop the link to that in the chat, that would be great, or I'll do it after the presentation. But basically what it is there's two sets of data on there. There's destination access data and travel cost data, and you can choose different kind of variables and sort through to look at access, say, to different locations by different modes, by walking or biking or transit or driving. And you can also filter by demographic groups. So we did it by minority population, low income population, and people without access to a car. And so you can compare those with kind of their non-equity counterparts to see who might have more equitable access in their region. The travel cost analysis was really actually very exploratory in nature. We didn't come out and say this is the one way that we need to look at transportation costs, and this is what we found. We looked at a couple of different options that illuminate transportation costs in different ways. For example, on the left-hand side of the screen is a map that shows the housing and transportation costs in different census tracts in our region. And that was really interesting to see, because people tend to live where transportation costs are higher, housing costs are lower, and vice versa. And so it's a very interesting tool to kind of see how that pattern plays out throughout our region. We also looked at values of travel time and calculated the difference between travel time between driving and public transit, which includes not only the travel time itself, but the comfort and utility of that trip. For example, if a route is very congested, that value of using that route is much less than if it's very free flow or it's a very comfortable ride. And so it's kind of a new way of looking at travel time or travel costs. And it's, again, I won't go through it in detail. It is on that online application. So I encourage you to kind of dig into that if you're interested in further understanding the value of travel time and how you might calculate that. Another project that we did that is helping us to kind of better is a metric, one of the metrics that we've recently developed to help us better understand transportation access and options in our region, is a study called Decade of Blue Bikes in the Boston region. And it showed where blue bike stations are located and how that has changed since 2011, when it was first started out as Hubway, actually back in 2011, and looked at kind of, is there equitable access for different population groups. And the result of that was a story map. It's a kind of it's an online interactive story that you, with maps and images that you can zoom in and out. We finished that story map in 2021, so about a year or so ago. We recently updated it with the most recent demographic data from the census. Because back when we first did it, that wasn't 2020 data wasn't available yet. And so we have new data, and we have all the most recent bike share stations. I'll just note that it's not live yet. The kind of version with the older demographic data is still in the story map. We're working on this new update as part of the LRTP needs assessment, but I wanted to just give you a sneak peek with the screenshots from the maps that we've made. And so map is in 2011. You can see the demographics, where the blue area shows where low income and minority population is greater than the regional average, and the green is where one of those population groups is greater than the regional average. And as you click through, we can go to 2016, and we see the bike share stations, the orange stations, orange dots growing or expanding out from Boston into other cities. And now we have, as of the fall of 2022, stations in, I believe, over 10 municipalities at this point. And we can see that expansion into those kind of green and blue areas where minority and low income populations make up a large percentage of the communities. So that's a positive trend. And to kind of supplement that visual, we also have created some charts that look at who lives near the bike share stations. And we looked at it in 2011, 2016, and 2022. And we looked to see what percentage of each demographic group lives within a half-mile of bike share stations. And just to kind of summarize what we see is that in 2011, about 30%, 40% of low income and minority populations lived within a half-mile of bike share station. In 2022, that is up to about 70%. And the difference between that and the non-minority, non-low income population is fairly minimal. It's not particularly the disparity or the difference between those demographic groups in terms of who lives near bike share stations is not all that great. So that's good news. That's a bunch of really good news and something that we can kind of keep tracking over time. I also wanted to point real briefly to some of the project evaluation criteria. This is another way that we analyze projects, or analyze kind of how projects are performing against kind of equity, our equity goals. We looked at things like investing in public transit, improving bicycle pedestrian network, reducing transit passenger delay. Does a project reduce carbon monoxide, VOCs, and nitrogen oxide? Does it enhance the natural environment? Does it improve crash safety and bicyclist safety and pedestrian safety? Does it incorporate climate resiliency, improve access to emergency facilities, and improve pedestrian facilities that already exist? And so these are some of the criteria that we're using right now to evaluate projects in the TIP. And what we basically look at, or if a project comes to us and it, say, reduces carbon monoxide, who is it reducing carbon monoxide for then? So it's, if it's reducing carbon monoxide for a low-income population, then it's going to receive more points in our evaluation process than a similar project who maybe is serving a higher income population. And so it really combines both kind of who lives in the project area, who lives nearby a project, and what are the impacts of the projects. And that's really what we want to get at: project impacts and who is it impacting. So that's kind of a summary of where we are, kind of some of the big things we've been working on recently around equity. And now I want to talk a little bit about where we're going, because I think this is where it's particularly exciting, at least for me. As I've kind of alluded to, we are working on a needs assessment for Destination 2050, our long-range plan. We recently wrapped up a survey where we got almost 1,000 respondents who gave us a lot of information about the sorts of things they want to see in a transportation network. So that's one example of how we identify the transportation needs in our region. We had a fairly diverse response in terms of both geographic response rate and demographics as well. And you can see some of the things that are important to folks on the screen. The bigger the word, the more important. Things like reliability stood out, frequency, safe transportation, has to be affordable, should be efficient, fast, clean, convenient, sustainable. I think things that we all would generally think are fairly positive. And we think, and this information really helps us to think about what do we need to be working on? Where do we need to go? What kind of goals and objectives do we need to be setting for this MPO? Another piece of information that is really important specifically to the transportation equity program is demographics. And so as I mentioned, we have a new, well, it's not terribly new at this point, but fairly new 2020 census that came out. They're still releasing data, a little bit behind, but we have been eagerly kind of analyzing all of the new demographic data that comes out from the Census Bureau. And so this map that's on the screen shows where the darker blue areas show where minority population is a higher percentage of the population in these communities. And we see that it's, that Boston and inner core is not necessarily always where people of color are most likely to live. Folks live all over our region. We see the highest concentrations in places like Randolph, in Boston, in Lynn, in Malden, Framingham, Milford, Marlborough. So, our region is very diverse, and it's not just in kind of the inner core area. And we see something similar and even more profound or more dramatic when we look at the low-income population. We see that there's low-income families all over our region, and we define low income as people living at less than 200% of the federal poverty line. Families in Rockport and Gloucester, Wilmington, Littleton, Acton, Marlborough, Milford, Boston, Hingham. And I think this is a really important trend for us to be thinking about, and ties into, I think there was a last meeting of the advisory council where that people in poverty are moving out more towards the suburbs and rural areas. In fact, when we compare 2020 data to 2010, what we see is that even though poverty decreased overall in the entire MPO region in the past 10 years, it has decreased by more in Boston and urban areas than in the suburbs and rural areas. So either the suburbs and rural areas, people are moving out there who are in poverty, or people living out there already are becoming poor, becoming in poverty, or kind of don't have as high an income. And so I think that's a really important trend to think about as we think about where do we need to put affordable transit systems, because people who are are struggling economically, are in poverty, are increasingly likely to live in rural and suburban areas in our region. So I want to go back to this slide about the transportation equity, measuring existing inequities, as we've kind of gone a couple of minutes away from that. So we have all these needs, and now we need to be thinking about where are we going to, how do we have our new MPO goals, and how do we reach those goals? How do we reach those objectives that we set for ourselves for eliminating disparities in various transportation outcomes? And so our goal at the equity program is really focusing now more on developing metrics to identify existing transportation equities and measure those changes over time. I've already kind of alluded to some things we've already been doing, where we've been doing that with like the bike share system, where we've been updating where bike share is relative to lower income and communities of color. But there's a lot more that we can be doing and measuring with the data that we now have. So in 2023 and beyond, we're finishing up the needs assessment. We're developing additional metrics, not just bike share, but other sorts of things like safety and air quality and all those other goal areas that we mentioned. And we want to eventually finalize the metrics and establish an update process. and develop a communication strategy, because I think this one is really important that we need to make sure that we're really on top of, is making sure that we're communicating the results of this work to people in a meaningful and useful way. And I mean to the advisory council, to our MPO board, and also to the public and to our stakeholders and to everyone who's interested in this, because I think we are in a unique position as an MPO, as a regional body, and as a large and very talented staff to be able to put together this data and present it to folks where they couldn't get it any other way. So to circle back a little bit to the analyses from the Title VI report, we already are doing some of this. As I alluded to, we have what's called disparate impact and disproportionate burden analysis, or DIDB analysis, that we look at impacts in our TIP and our long range transportation plan to see how our projects as a group are impacting or will impact different demographic groups. We do look at things like access to parks and emissions and congestion and access to jobs and healthcare, essential places and higher education and travel times. And so we kind of have that as a core, as a starting point. We're not starting from scratch. We have all this stuff that we've been doing already in the TIP and the long range plan. And we want to elevate that and expand that so we can be tracking performance more holistically across the projects that we are funding in the TIP and the long range plan, and look at even more metrics, revise any methodology we might want to revise, and create some process where we can make sure that people have access to the results easily of the analyses that we do. Which leads me to the title of my presentation, which is Building Accountability, Accessibility, and Transparency. We want to have an online home for all these data. We want to be able to have repeatable and transparent analyses, things that we can do, that the MPO staff can replicate year after year, and that folks from the public or stakeholders, advisory board can kind of dig into if they're interested as well, and hold us accountable, right? I think that's really important part of the transparency piece, because we need to be holding up our end of the bargain. When we say we're going to, look, we have these objectives, we need to address these goals and objectives. We also want to make sure that the products are accessible in multiple formats. That includes being ADA accessible and also being available in different ways that allow different people of different backgrounds, different learning abilities, and different reading levels to be able to access the information that we have. So it might mean we do a report, it might also mean we do a plain language like one pager. We might do interactive report or interactive applications, things like that. And finally, we want to make sure that we're integrating all this into planning processes, right? We need to do a better job, I think, of working with existing processes around developing the TIP and the long range plan and UPWP, so that the information that comes out of these analyses goes into this decision making at the MPO board meetings, so that the MPO board has kind of a fuller picture of how their decisions are going to impact communities of color, low-income communities, and other equity groups across our region. Some of the things that we're kind of pointing toward right now and looking toward doing right now is improving, we have our website, we have a lot of information on our equity page. We have an entire page dedicated to the work that we're doing in our equity program. There's certainly ways that we could improve this and make it more kind of accessible in different ways. And so that's something we're thinking about. We also are starting to have more and more what we call data repositories. So basically they hold data on the line and people can access it from anywhere, no matter who you are. For example, the Identifying an Equity Study, we have a repository on the site GitHub, and you can scroll through all of that information again and see how we did the analyses and do it yourself if you'd like. And finally, we also want to be building more online applications that are interactive, and that anyone can kind of dive into. You don't necessarily have to have a big background in transportation, but these should be kind of really accessible to anybody who is interested in kind of understanding how equity is, the state of equity in transportation in our region. And so that is my presentation. I have a couple of discussion questions. If folks, I'm happy to answer any questions that people have. If you want to have a more structured discussion, I'd be interested to hear more about what the advisory council is interested in us to work on it through the equity program in the next years, how we might be able to better measure the goals and objectives that we've set for ourselves in our new long range plan, things that you might want us to do to help you better engage with the MPO's equity work and with the decision-making process. So thank you for your time. Happy to take any questions and comments.
Thank you, Betsy. And so once again, if you could raise your hand electronically, I can see you in the order in which you raise your hand. Franny.
Yeah, I'm looking at all of this opportunistically. I remember when you came out to the Acton region to discuss some of this. What I want to know is how I can use this data or the offers of using the data to look at equity in a certain corridor that covers even more than one MPO in part. Like specifically in my case, I'm interested in the Lowell to Framingham north-south corridor, not by 495, but through the towns so people can get to work, who come from some of those cities and work at stores, nursing homes, farms along the way. And so is this data available? Like if I wanted to be able to focus on all of this equity data and study that corridor, would I, as a resident, come to the MPO and ask for help? Or is that data, I mean, in the future, you're hoping to have online data, but right this minute, how can this information be used by our suburban towns?
I would say right this minute, I would reach out to someone on staff. A lot of this, so what we have available online, what kind of go back a few slides. So like this data repository, this online application, these were for one specific study. So these were for identifying transportation inequities in the Boston region. So if you want that data, that is all available. You'll note that there's an aggregation area drop down, so you can look at specific subregions, but it doesn't get down to the corridor level that you're talking about. So if you're interested in like looking at destination access or any other metric for a particular corridor, at this point, I would definitely reach out to someone on staff. In the future, as we build out some of these platforms, I think having the capability of looking at smaller geographies is definitely a priority for us.
Okay.
Thank you. Are you set, Franny?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Sure, John Strauss.
Thank you, Len. I had a question. In Burlington, we have a lot of biotech activity. And also we have, the restaurants and the mall and so forth. So my question is this data transferable to essential workers? Is there a way that we can project the use and the cost for essential workers to come to Burlington to work and then go home in terms of presenting to the regional transportation authorities, like a cost figure for them to work with so they would be able to plan or be able to tell us the ability of their organizations to provide service?
So are you interested in like the cost of people traveling to those destinations, or how many, or whether people can reach those destinations, or both?
Well, right now, theoretically, they could if the RTAs expanded their schedule. So of course, the first thing when you talk to anybody is, well, how much it's going to cost? I have to go before a board, et cetera, et cetera. So is there a way to use the information that you've gathered in one of these apps as a presentation tool to be able to show these people or to integrate the business and the RTAs and show this is what you're going to be looking at in terms of costs?
I think the cost of implementing a service, that's not something that this particular application could help with. We have transit service planners on staff who do those who do technical assistance for transit services for RTAs or anyone else who's operating transit. So they would have would be able to go into more detail into this particular project. I think this app, what this app can tell you is if you want to see like a particular, the Burlington region, I'm not sure which aggregation area that would be, but if you wanted to look at that, that catchment area and see, what right now, what places, how much access to say jobs do people living in that particular area have, to maybe demonstrate that there isn't a lot, there are fewer jobs maybe in that area that folks can access than other areas. But I'm happy to like talk a little bit more in detail, look a little bit more about the data to see if that's something that would be beneficial to you.
Well, that wouldn't be entirely beneficial. And also our other problem here in Burlington is that we span two areas, like we're in the MPO, but the service is provided by the Lowell area. I can't remember what their abbreviation is. So that makes it even more fun.
Yeah,
So
just
be happy to catch up with you a little bit and just to try to figure out. And then also we have to present to the town manager here in Burlington and the select board, et cetera, because they always have a thumb and stuff. And okay, so that'd be great. So maybe I could send you an email or we could get together.
Absolutely. I put my email in the chat, so please feel free to reach out.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, John. And next we have Andy Rico.
This is really a great presentation. A couple of things that stuck out to me, I guess first was just the kind of suburbanization of poverty that you mentioned, Betsy. I'm wondering, this is something that I think I've heard in particular as the cost of housing in the core has gone up and up and up. And I've heard people talk about displacement from a income and class, and also a racial kind of displacement thing too. And to see the data kind of show up in that in 2020 is one thing. One caveat with 2020 that I feel like people talk about is it's 2020 and you're supposed to be reporting where you were in April of that year, right? And for many people, they made some pretty significant changes around that time, including maybe, partially or completely moving to different parts of other parts of the region, or even, other parts of the greater region like New England, right? So I'm wondering how much of that, whether you've evaluated how much of some of those kind of things might be receding a little bit. And two, as a follow-up to that is has that you're thinking about in particular reaching out to low-income communities? Because if there are poorer families, it's actually harder to get to suburbs because there's just less opportunity for activities that you might catch them, right? Just kind of getting some thoughts there.
Yeah, I think that's your first question. I'm aware that definitely, of the census, that it was a funny year to be doing a census, and there certainly could be anomalies that wouldn't be present in any other year. I don't know how the Census Bureau dealt with that, if at all. We haven't kind of done anything with the data in terms of, that we've used in various analyses to kind of reflect any changes in where people lived. But it is certainly possible that people kind of lived different places or moved to different places temporarily, and maybe they're now back in Boston or what have you. I don't know how you might get at that. So yeah, I guess the bottom line is that we haven't really kind of factored that into into thinking about our low income data. To answer your second question, you were breaking up a little bit. Were you talking about like engagement with low income communities in the suburbs?
Yeah, it's kind of a, I think we're starting to develop, at least in Cambridge, some ways to, start to build relationships and start to meet people where they're at more and more.
Yeah.
But I see that gap being much larger the farther out you go, especially because, there's less activity a lot of the times. So being able to hear from people, it gets a little bit harder because you just literally have to travel further sometimes to be able to catch people. So wondering if you all have started to think about ways to maybe try to engage people. And as the data kind of shows, there is that suburbanization of poverty. So
yeah, that's a really good question. We've definitely found that online engagement has allowed us to reach more people. So I'm sure most of us have found in more places. So I think that's been a benefit. I don't know if Stella, Stella works on our public engagement team. If you wanted to speak to that at all, if you've had any thoughts about more in-person engagement and places further afield.
Yeah, sure. I think that's an excellent point, Andy. Definitely something that we can do better at as we continue to expand our engagement program. A lot of our focus is within the inner core just because of our proximity to it, as much as the population concentration. But certainly with this data available, I think it really points to the necessity of taking that larger regional vision and approach more often in the work that we do. So, one of the things that we've been thinking about developing and starting to develop is, building more evaluation and measurement and evaluation into the engagement program. And one of the ways that we're looking at doing that is using some of the data, sort of what Betsy was showing, those maps, and kind of starting to target our engagement approaches a little bit more, on any given project or activity that we're doing, to make sure that we're hitting various groups in an equitable way, and not just post engagement looking at how we did, but also kind of in real time. Like if we have a survey out and we're collecting responses, we can kind of juxtapose the geographic data of responses that we're getting, the demographic data, onto those types of maps and see, where the gaps are and how we can fill those. So that's one thing that we're looking to definitely build more into our engagement program over the next year. I think, really, really strong point to bring up. And certainly, open to continuing the conversation on that with folks as well at future meetings if you're interested in kind of helping to talk through, guide us more on what we should be doing and what direction we should be going.
Thanks, Stella. Andy, yeah, it seems like there's some kind of noise cancellation going on with your audio when you're speaking. So I'm not sure the source of that, but if you're not using headphones, that might help. So we're rapidly losing our padding. And so I'm going to take John and Jen. That'll be the last two. And if you could keep your questions on the tight side, that would help. Thanks, John.
Okay, thanks, Len. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. This is really to get to John Strauss. One thing that could help you get some fundamental basis to answer your question would be taking a page from the Longwood Medical Association and surveying your, I guess, Middlesex Turnpike corridor, businesses and institutions and what have you, in terms of where their employees and their feeder markets are, where they're coming from, and to get to that area. That way you can plan your parking, any kind of regional transportation needs and things like that. But based on that, that's helped them immensely. Secondly, one of the things, Betsy, that seems to fall off the map is really the magic, MAPC area, which includes Sudbury and Acton and Weston, not Weston, but Concord, et cetera. And although there isn't a significant to show on your map, population of people who need the services or have inequitable service needs, they're there and they're real and they battle with it. A lot of it's the aging population, aging in place population, and those with disabilities. And it's a struggle because the smaller and you try to target a solution, the more per capita price it is. So that's something that we're struggling with, but it is a real need in these communities, which quite often have inadequate sidewalk situations or even senior center shuttles and such like that. Just something to raise.
Thanks, John. All right, Betsy, did you want to say anything other than acknowledge?
No, I think that's a really good point. No, those population groups are definitely part of our transportation equity program, and we have a lot of those analyses that we do. Same thing, analyses that we do for communities of color and low income, we do for the other four as well. And we are doing the coordinated transportation plan that focuses on seniors and people with disabilities. So you'll hear more from us on that. So that would be another good opportunity for us to kind of dive more deeply into those needs and develop solutions for them. Thank you.
Thanks, Betsy. Jennifer.
Yeah, it's fine. Thank you, Len. So first of all, Betsy, thank you so much for this presentation. I think you did a fantastic job kind of situating the Title VI within the larger equity program. Am I audio okay?
Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. I was wondering if you could flip to the slide you had showing the minority population percents by the different municipalities. I just wanted to, there we go. Okay, cool, thank you. I guess I wanted to kind of on the theme of kind of the suburbanization of poverty, which of course is like a trend that I think we are seeing and is important as was noted by Andy and others. One thing as like kind of a request, I think, and sometimes in presenting this information, there's this interesting like kind of mapping bias where if you're like shading area, you kind of like when I look at this map, I see Boston comes out and other areas come out, and so does like Marlboro, and because of the way that like this is looking at the percent population, it kind of creates this dynamic where it looks like there's quite a significant population there in Marlboro, and percentage wise it's almost maybe up there close to Boston, but when I went and like looked on the census website, it's like a 30% minority in Marlboro, 50%-ish in Boston. And then when you do the math of like, okay, and how many people live in Boston, how many people live in Marlboro, you're looking at 13,000 people as opposed to 327,000 people. So I guess it's just like kind of a sort of request that as we're like thinking about how this impacts our scoring and whatnot, we look not just at the percentages, but also at like the number of people we're talking about, because I think it's an important kind of check to understand like what the potential impact of different investments might be. So that's my point, which is more of a statement than a question, but thank you for letting me make it.
Of course, yeah, I think that's a perennial. I think you were at the MPO when we were updating some of these criteria, and it's a hard thing to kind of percentage versus population, both are really important. But yeah, we can certainly visually you can think about how to better kind of demonstrate that difference, and it's a very, very good point. As we kind of we'll certainly take that into consideration if we update more of the criteria again. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Betsy. If you want any closing words, I would say that we should all take a look at the questions that she posed at the end, and feel free to respond individually to Betsy. And certainly if you want to take up those questions at our next meeting, we can devote some time to that. But it's an issue that's going to be around for a while, so we'll have plenty of time to provide additional feedback. So anything else you want to say, Betsy?
No, just thank you, and happy to, if anyone has any feedback, questions, wants anything to do with the equity program, happy to help. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. All right, so moving on, next item on the agenda is the Unified Planning Work Program, UPWP study proposal discussion. We'll have Shalika Murthy. She'll do lead us in a discussion and brainstorm the UPWP study proposals, the study proposal process, priority themes, and study ideas. Shalika?
Thank you, Lynn, and thank you all for having me to your meeting this afternoon. In this presentation, I am going to briefly recap the development timeline for the Unified Planning Work Program before jumping into a brainstorming activity to understand the Advisory Council's priority themes. The results from this discussion will help inform the thematic direction of the universe of proposed studies, which, as I will discuss in more detail in just a minute, will begin taking shape over the next couple of weeks. So next slide, please, Stella. So jumping right into it, here is the development schedule for the UPWP as a whole. When I last spoke with this group in the fall, we had begun our sub-regional outreach and opened the survey to solicit new ideas for discrete studies. Today, we're approaching the end of the submission period of the survey. The last day to submit a study idea is February 15th. And we have begun updating the text of the document. Over the next few weeks, we will develop the raw universe of proposed studies, which we will be presenting to you in early March and hold internal discussions on staff priorities. Concurrently, we will also be discussing the universe with the UPWP committee. Next slide, please, Stella. One more. Staff have additionally been working on identifying a few themes to guide the agency's work across all of its programs, from the UPWP and the LRTP to all the way to the travel demand model and everything in between. We have come up with 4 themes to help guide the UPWP this year. Those are equity, resiliency, safety, and uncertainty. At the same time, we are in the process of developing Destination 2050, the MPO's new long-range transportation plan. Could you go to the next slide real quick, Stella? On the screen here, you can see some of the goal areas outlined in the LRTP. So I will note that while discrete studies do not necessarily have to fall within one of these themes, we encourage you to be thinking about them as you submit study ideas and through today's brainstorming activity. So just a quick overview. So with that, we wanted to start by asking you all to think about your priorities and share them using a tool called Mentimeter. Following the link on the screen, or if you scan the QR code, we'll ask you to please share some words or phrases relating to what you think should be a priority for the UPWP this year. Once we get a good number of responses, we can move to an open discussion. At that point, we'll share some guiding and framing questions on a Jamboard. And at the same time, we welcome you to post questions on the board or just call them out during the discussion. So first, let's hop onto Menti.
Yeah, and as Lika said, this is kind of a new tool that we're using here, but just to kind of get everyone's creative juices flowing. If you'd like, you can use the link that I posted directly in the chat. You can also go to www.menti.com and use the code 81561439. There's also a QR code here on the screen that you can scan on your phone. If you're having trouble with this, please feel free to just answer this question in the chat or raise your hand and answer it to the group. Again, the question is, what themes or topics do you think should be prioritized in this year's UPWP? And I will actually stop sharing for a moment so that we can go over to the activity and see in real time what things are popping up for us. So bear with us here as we think about this question. Right. Everyone see that okay? Awesome. So thank you all for weighing in. Getting a lot of themes and topics here, some that are jumping out: community-based planning, equitable decision-making, access is a big one. Again, the larger these show up, the more people have put the same thing. A lot of these are in a similar vein though. We have frequency, connectivity. Connectivity, again, a big one. Resiliency coming up a few times. Public transit, transit vision zero, pricing roadways, regional connections, equity, buses. This is definitely in line with a lot of the things that I think Betsy talked about, and we've been thinking about as we develop our long range plan as well, those goal areas that we looked at. Looks like a few things are coming in still, but we're slowing down a little bit. Active transportation, walking, blue bikes, micro transit. Right. So again, you can keep monitoring this, keep adding things if you'd like. Public transit and connectivity are jumping out more. I'll stop sharing for a moment though, and we can get back to the next activity. Like, while I'm doing this, I don't know if you want to give a preview of kind of how this all fits into the larger conversation that we're going to be having today. The feedback we're looking for.
Absolutely. So what my goal really is for this conversation is to get a sense of your priorities, what you would really like to see studied in the UPWP next year, and what are some of the big ideas that you would like us to focus on. And the way that we are going to use this feedback is to help shape the universe of proposed studies, beginning with the raw universe that we will be presenting to you in about, I think at the next RTAC meeting, and continuing through as we develop the final universe of proposed studies. We are looking to essentially take your input and have that frame how we think about what studies we want to fund and what kind of projects or programs we'd like to emphasize over the next year. So can we drop the link to the Jamboard?
Yes. And that looks like Franny. I see Franny and Lynn's hands up there.
Yeah, I asked this question, not like to put anybody on the spot, but because it would really be helpful. I would love to see our advice for the last 2 years, because I remember going through this, and see like what was done in the end. You know what I mean? Or because in the past we've gone through this and I never come back and look. Well, I guess we do review the final list, but then I don't see what happened with the studies, except the few that we get here. It somehow would be nice to see the sort of whole life cycle of what our opinions were in the past, how that related to what ultimately was proposed, and which studies were done and how successful they were. Because hearing about the studies, besides the ones we've heard about here, would be a good way to sort of help identify, like, oh, wow, we want to hear more about that one, or on board with that study. You know what I mean? It's just like, to sort of see the outcomes would be.
Well, we get the memos, when the studies are done, they are presented at the MPO board meetings, and they are on the website. I think you want a more intuitive access to them, and maybe that's something that I can work on with you to get, because as
Maybe
far
I
as
just-
me, as far as our,
maybe I just need to go look.
yeah, and as far as our, those I think are on the website. If they're not, then they should be. Because those are our letters, that we submit to the board. So if they're not there, I can work with Stella to get them there. So at least now you have our comments, meaning then what studies are done are actually in the UPWP document that comes out. And so you have that data. And as I said, the studies, or then we get the work proposals, the work, how's it? Do they call them proposals? Anyway, we get the proposals for the work, the work scopes, and then those are approved, and then we get the memos at the end that tell us the results of the studies. But I mean, if you feel that they need to be integrated in a way that's more intuitive to you, that's an interesting question, and we can work on that. Because
So maybe I guess I just want to be linked to all on this committee, since we're not all regularly going to the MPO meetings, to be sort of linked, sort of see, okay, here is what happened last year. Just a sort of summary of what happened.
Well, what are you thinking that maybe like a quarterly or semi-annually report of
Or
what's
even
going
just
on?
once a year, sort of a summary at the end. This is what you all came up with. This is what, because a lot of times we probably repeat our same opinions from year to year. And so it would be nice to see. Maybe we'll change our opinion. Maybe we'll say, okay, look, they've done a lot of that. So I'm going to stop saying that we need to do that study.
Yeah, then this could be a good time to do something like that. So this time of year, or maybe in January or before this meeting, we could do that. So that's a good idea. Why don't we work on that?
Okay.
And it's probably work on getting you something, for this year, so that it can help you with making decisions or suggesting ideas for this year.
Mhm.
Does that work, Franny?
Yeah.
Right. Great, excellent. So what I wanted to do was do a study proposal, and I've talked with this. The write-ups committee very much wants to do this. I've been tasked with doing it. And I talked with Marty a bit to get some ideas about how to focus it. Essentially, we have the travel demand model, the new travel demand model, which has lots of inputs, and the goal would be to see which of the inputs have the biggest input on the utilization of transit, certainly with a focus on equity, either for EJ communities, or any community where we feel that there would be a benefit to the inequities were transit, to be better. And so that's kind of like the framework. You can essentially go anywhere with it. But essentially, let's find out what inputs in the new transit, the new travel demand model have the biggest impacts on utilization of transit. So with that, Shaleka, do I need to flesh it out more? Because I know you don't. I know it's not a good idea to just like toss out these, 2-sentence things, but I'm just not sure how much more I can add that would be useful. But if you want,
I would say whatever thoughts you have, like put them down, and like you can send it over to me in an email, or you can put it in the survey. Either way is fine.
yeah.
The main reason I guess we ask for detail is just so we have an accurate understanding of what the project proponent is actually looking to get out of the study. So
Right.
we're not making too many assumptions on our end about their intentions or what they're looking to do. So as much like context or detail as you can provide
Sure.
would be helpful.
All right. Figure out some time to write something more before the 15th. Okay, great. Thanks. And AC?
Sorry, I'm still driving. I don't want to beleaguer the point, but to extend on to what Franny was saying, I want to know now the study's been done, the data's been collected, how was it implemented? Do we get ever a report on that?
Well,
Like who used the data?
all right. Well, in terms of who uses the data, that's an interesting question. I have to go back and look at the the objective of the study. So for instance, the one that had a memo come out last time was like a review study on, I think it was pricing. Actually, it's funny because I was going to report on that. Let me just pull up my profile. Wow. So it was on learning from roadway pricing experiences. So it kind of gave. Oh, actually, that's a work scope. This was on parking policy and trip generation by Rosemary Buchanan and Deborah Mile, I think. And that one was kind of like a review of studies. And so that's just information that's now provided. Actually, I used it because I provided it to my colleagues on the select board because we are thinking about changing our overnight permitted parking policy. And I thought that was really good in terms of helping people get a sense of what parking availability does to the trip generation. So you put the study out there, and then it's up to people who read the study to utilize it. We're not going to force people to use it, right? And so you can use it or not use it. So that would be a study where the objective was to give us some information based on the research that's out there. I think maybe what your question is getting at is more for the projects that are done by the TIP. If you like do a complete streets project, what is the outcome of that? That's a legitimate question, but it wouldn't be one for the UPWP, but to broaden your question, or to give you a question, I think the biggest impact is like, let's see what does come out of a study and then try to get a sense of who utilizes the study and if that is indeed trackable, because unless I were to report to the UPWP, to report to the MPO, hey, I used your study and I gave it to my colleagues, they wouldn't know. I don't know if we can, I don't know to what extent we can mandate that people do that, but I guess we could always try to say, like, if you used our study, please let us know, because it'd be helpful to us to know who is using our studies and how. So does that answer your question or get at your point somewhat, Casey?
No, it more or less does. I'm just wondering, like, if there's any way to track the effectiveness of the study, like, what came of the study. Was there really any policy change put in place because of the study, or any?
Right.
That's it.
Yeah. Stay tuned in Arlington.
I think Tegan might be able to speak to that a little bit then.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, Lynn, if you're good. Actually, prior to, I think, any of the staff on this call's tenure, staff worked with the Regional Transportation Advisory Council and others. There was an attempt to make a kind of a database of all the different studies that had been done and to follow up with different project proponents and or otherwise to try to determine whether or like what the outcomes were of the studies. I believe Sandy was working on it at the time. And again, it was a few years back. And what he noted is that it was extremely difficult and time consuming to get anybody to respond to the requests to find out what the kind of next steps or outcomes were. And so I think it's a really important topic. And I think it would be good for us to continue to think about, are there ways that we can kind of track or collect that information? But so far we haven't found, a very feasible way to do it. And then I want to add a completely different, well, it's related, but a little bit different. One of the things that we have been talking about, especially at a leadership level at staff, is how we start to do a more comprehensive job of, we do really excellent work, we do really excellent analysis, we produce a study, and to your point, Len, we wait to see if people use it. But I think that as staff to the MPO, we could look at kind of more of a full life cycle of, once a study is released, how do we proactively potentially connect with communities who might benefit from the results of that study? And in some cases, how can we turn that into something that can feed into our technical assistance programs that we have as well? And we're short on capacity right now to begin to really advance that, but we've been beginning to think about a framework that we can do that with. So it doesn't answer, Anna Christina's question now, it doesn't give a satisfactory answer now, but I agree that it's an important question, and it's something that we've been thinking about how to tackle a bit better than we have right now or to date.
Yeah. Well, but taking, I was actually remembering, I mean, that effort by Sandy was more geared towards, I mean, the projects out of the tip, and that we were having problems getting responses from opponents, I mean, about the effects of their projects. I mean, and my response to that was, well, I mean, if there were metrics that we used to tell us, I mean, that the project was worth doing, then we could use those same metrics, in order to evaluate the effectiveness of the project. But his response to that was, though, but we still need to get input from the proponents. So yeah, we know what questions to ask but if they don't answer our emails, or queries, then we can't get that. So I was remembering it based on the tip more so than the UPWP.
So they were both. We
both.
continue to try to tackle the concept of doing more tip before and after studies.
Yeah.
And then probably less discussed because we had less to discuss was also looking at some of the studies, particularly like corridor studies and things that we could actually follow up to see if design had advanced, but those are
Right.
UPWP studies. And anything else that we could kind of track more directly, did this lead to a project? Those were the sort of database of, those were the list of studies that Sandy was kind of piloting, following up on to see if we could determine outcomes, and
Right.
also getting very little response at the time. So we talked more, I think, about the tip projects in that context, but yeah.
Right. I
It's a
got you.
challenging topic, but something I
Yeah.
care about for sure.
Right. But for the corridors, I guess, just thinking out loud, certainly for anything big, we would see that get into the tip, the universe, at some point. So we kind of know if they did propose something. I guess the question would then be, well, did that come out of the corridor study, or did it come someplace up from some other source? Most likely, I would say it would be like it came out of the corridor study, and then other than that, I guess you could kind of like keep an eye on the municipalities and kind of see what they're doing, via their websites, but that once again is labor, but then it doesn't really require that they feedback, unless you then need to just check in to see if it was the UPWP, I'm sorry, the MPO's work that led to it. But I'm not disputing you taking, I'm just going into problem solving mode. It's like, if I had this problem, how would I solve it? So John?
I wish you could solve it.
Yeah, really. So, John?
Yeah, Len, I agree with you in terms of some of those corridor studies, and those could even be micro corridors, if you will, and they could even blend into complete streets issues and where they implemented, or community connections, things like that, opportunities, etc., based on successes or failures, or something that was that opportunity that never happened or never got implemented. So there's good learning to have in that full life cycle on both UPWP and the tip that's been long asked for. Thanks.
Yeah, great, thank you. So we have until the 15th, to get solid ideas, to Shalika, and so Shalika, do you want any closing comments?
Sure, thank you, Len. Yeah, I am very much looking forward to seeing any study ideas that you propose. And of course, if there was a comment you'd like to make, or like a theme or a priority that you'd like us to focus on, or at the very least consider, please feel free to reach out to me. I could drop an email in the chat. And I'm looking forward to presenting to you in about 1 month on the Raw Universa proposed studies.
Thank you. So we'll see. I guess we'll see you the next meeting then, if you say in a month. So all right, looking forward to that. We have an agenda item. And so great. And so moving on to approval of past meeting minutes now. As the email said, we gotta approve some minutes, folks. So I need a motion and I need a second. So we have a hand up by John McQueen.
Yep.
That's a motion?
Yes,
Okay.
it is a motion.
Do we want to do? Let's do all three at
Yes.
once. Unless you have some
Agreed.
compelling reason to pull them out and
No.
separate them. I'm
This
John
is a
Stewart.
motion. It's a motion for all three.
Okay, thank you, John Stewart.
Second.
All right, folks. So I think Stella, are you in a position to do a roll call vote?
Sure. Yeah, I can.
Okay.
I can pull it out.
All right.
all of my active members here.
Sure.
If I skip you in this roll call, it is because while we welcome you at this meeting, you're not a voting member of our TAC. So just want to throw that out there. I'm not purposely skipping anyone. So Len Diggins.
Yes.
Okay, Franny Osman,
Yes.
John Seward,
Yes.
John McQueen,
Yes.
Anna Cristina Fregoso.
Yes.
Okay. Owen McDonald.
Yes.
Rain, are you here representing David Montgomery?
Yes, I am.
Okay, great. I believe I got everyone. Sorry, I'm just looking down my list of participants here.
Yeah. Has Andy left us?
Andy
leave us.
did drop off. Yeah.
Those Cambridge people, I
Unfortunately.
tell you. You know, so it's like, I'm really giving Tegan a hard time, but anyway, anyway. All right, well, thank you, folks. Appreciate it. You know, so next on the agenda, I think is chairs. Yeah. So since we last met, folks, we had 3 meetings. You know, in January 9th, on the January 19th meeting, we had the MPO Title VI report from but it's a highlight. I'm just giving you some highlights from the meetings, and so and that was part of the emphasis for asking Betsy to talk with us. So you got what she said at that meeting, and then some from other meetings we had. On the January 26th report, the highlight was Stella's presentation of the public engagement program. And she emphasized that there's a greater role for the advisory council. You can see more about that on page 12. And I just really wanted to express my appreciation for the work that she is doing with the advisory council. I didn't say it in the meeting, you know, because I'm keenly aware of the level at which I participate in those meetings. And so usually after like 1 or 2 comments, I really hold back on, especially if I see like there is a opportunity for me to make this point to the person in one of these. So really, Stella, thanks for all your work, you know, on the public engagement program, and especially your diligence in incorporating the advisory council more into the process. So very much appreciated.
Thank you, Len, for saying that. I appreciate that. And you know, still a lot of work to be done. So I'm looking forward to, you know, working with all of you and continuing to build the advisory council's role and you know, support greater influence on decision making and all of the things that you guys have been pushing for over the next months and years.
Great, yeah, thank you. You're welcome. I should say you're welcome. So the next, I kind of mentioned it, that I thought was a highlight, was MPO learning from roadway pricing experiences, and that's the work program. And so that's the congestion study, folks, that we've been really trying to get for a while. It's not the full-fledged congestion study, but it's a win that we got this meeting. And so I think we're going to learn something from it. Who knows what will come next? We certainly have another administration, so this administration may be more amenable to the concept, in which case we may get more, not only from us, but maybe from MassDOT doing its own study. You know, and the other was a memo on parking policy and trip generation. And I mean, I strongly want to suggest that you read that. And Rosemary McCarran was really nice enough to send me some follow-up stuff, because I had questions about economic opportunities and how they are affected by car utilization, and the intersection of that with equity, mostly low-income folks. Are they pretty much in a situation where they need to use a vehicle in order to get to jobs, because the jobs aren't accessible by transit? And she sent me like 3 good studies, and if anyone's interested, I'll be happy to forward those along. And then in the last meeting, we had an update, a revised planning framework, for the LRTP by Michelle Scott, and she incorporated a lot of comments from the advisory council. And I didn't express my appreciation at that meeting either, because once again, I just kind of wanted not talk so much. But I think she really listened a lot to what we said. And as I often say to folks, when they say to me, that they said something and then they say, you ignored my idea, or what I had to say is like, no, didn't ignore it. It's just that heard it and didn't accept it, and so not everything we said got accepted, but I know that we were heard, and so I mean, you have to take all the input that you get, and then you choose some, you accept parts of some, and accept wholly some. And so I think the framework, which was already good, is better, and certainly the exercise they went through with Michelle, I thought was very much worth the while. So that's a chair report, because I say that a lot of times I just skip through them, but this one is it. If you have any questions, now's the time. I see John's hand up.
Yeah, this is just for Stella. If you can, with some of the more lengthy studies like equity and things like that are volumes of pages, if there's a chance you can get that to us with your initial agenda memo or when it's posted versus the day before the meeting here, it gives us a little more flexibility to fit it into our schedules, which sometimes reach beyond our tech and our lives. And that's about it. And the other thing, Len, I guess just for our eyes on the LRTP and UPWP is, since it's the Beanpot time, that we ought to have an eye toward the programs that we're looking at and evaluating, and for their implications to skate toward the puck where it will be, not where it is, in terms of where we really want to go with those things, not to live in the past.
Well, that's a good point. I mean, and was that one of the themes that popped out, or did you enter in? Because it's kind of like I kind of have a hard time like encapsulating that into a word or two. But still, we don't have to. We can just like convey that to Sri Lanka directly. In fact, she's here now. I'm sure she's hearing it. So yeah, more forward-thinking studies that
Yes.
are anticipating where we as a region want to be. Based on either projections or even based on what we want. Is that what I'm hearing, John?
Yes, actually, that came from Mayor Menino to me with a conversation one time. We were talking about things for the Greenway, and he just said we should skate to where the puck is gonna be, and not just always where it is in the moment.
Right. I hear that, and then often I think, well, we should also try and get to the future that we want. And so maybe that puck's going somewhere, and we don't like where it's going. And so let's try to somehow influence where it's going.
It's up to us to capture it and redirect it. It's going the wrong way.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that, John. So all right. Old business, new business, member items. All right, I'm not seeing anything. So with that, I'll express my appreciation, folks, for a good meeting. And I hope the rest of this short month is good to you. And we'll see hopefully all of you in 28 days. So with that, take a motion to adjourn.
Yeah, move to adjourn. And thank you, Stella, for everything.
And second by John
And
McQueen.
Len.
You're welcome. And I will follow David Muller's form and just say we're dismissed or the meeting's adjourned. And I'll hang around, Stella, just a little feedback.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Carry on. Have a good time.
Thanks, Linda. Bye.
Bye.